All right, welcome students of NKT. This is another episode of Test Don't Guess, a conversation about NKT. I am really pleased and excited to have Dr. Kathy Dooley here this morning. Thanks for being here, Kathy. Kathy,
thanks for having me.
yeah, Kathy has been doing NKT for a while now, an instructor of NKT, and she's a doctor of chiropractic in New York City and owns a gym out there. I want to ask you just kind of your origin story of NKT. What were your beginnings of NKT? When did you learn NKT, and what was that process like? Did you just grab onto it right away? Was it something totally new for you? What was the learning process, and what were some of your struggles in learning NKT?
Okay, I think a lot of newcomers can commiserate with my learning struggle, so I'd love to share that.
Yeah.
I heard about NKT in 2011, in the fall of 2011, when David came to New York at Peak Performance, and Perry Nicholson and the Peak team had hosted him for the first time. And of course, I followed Stop Chasing Pain and Dr. Perry Nicholson's amazing posts. And I was like, oh, if Perry's into it, it's got to be something worth checking out. So
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have David come the following January to New Jersey. And I went for the very first time. I think Perry was assisting him for that one. If I remember correctly, there weren't very many assists, and it was mostly attendees. And NKT was still growing at that point from the ground up. And that's where I got started. So that was January, I guess, 2012.
Okay.
And I struggled for a year. There wasn't what we have now, the amazing NKT community. My gosh,
Yeah.
we have 4,000 plus members.
Oh, yeah.
We're on the majority of continents, and there's NKT study groups and support materials, and we just didn't have that yet. And David was still building up NKT scholars and even just starting that. And I remember when it was beginning, and so there were just a handful of people that knew NKT the way that David teaches it, and I was really excited to get to know it, but I just couldn't find myself, really understanding. To me, it was I had done muscle testing before, but not in the same way NKT does, in the very special way that we do it. And I found I didn't have anybody to study with or really practice with. And my amazing friend, Matthew Tolstoy, he is an Equinox Tier 4 trainer in Columbus Circle here in New York. And he just really wouldn't let me quit. He said, this stuff is really cool. Come and practice with me. And so we used to practice, the two of us. And I was like, if I'm really going to get to know this, I think I'm going to take level 2. And I had talked to David a couple times and said, I think that you're onto something. I just don't know how I can integrate it into what I do. And he was like, you need to take level 2, Kathy. But back then there weren't many level 2s. And so I had to go all the way to London following year, February 2013. That was the year that NKT exploded for me, because I took level 2 a year after taking level 1. I got certified and went to London, and wow, that gave me a standard operating system with all the subsystems and the classifications of intrinsic and extrinsic core. I was like, now this is really cool. I just kicked myself for waiting too long, like everyone does.
What was the gap of time between taking level 1 and taking level 2 for you?
For me, a year and a month, which nowadays I would have had to have retaken it,
Wow.
I know. And I could have benefited from retaking the level 1, I'm sure, but there were so few seminars that David was doing back then. They were really few and far between, which is shocking now when you see the NKT seminars page on his website.
I know that there's constantly seminars at all times.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed not to be able to find one that was near you that you could go to. Really no excuse, because David's opened up so many territories and wants the word to get out for people to be able to utilize the technique.
Yeah. So you were fortunate enough to have somebody in your area who knew NKT that kind of encouraged you along. So there was no study groups in your area at that time. It was just you and this one other person, and you just met up and practiced things.
Yeah, that's all we had. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to do. That's how a study group is born, right? So what I love about NKT is that David encourages for you not just to come to a seminar and to look at the Vimeos, but to get together with your colleagues and practice. And that's exactly what works. Matt was my ride home. I was like, hey, is anybody going to Astoria? I need a ride home. And he and Neil Snyder said, yeah, we can take you. And we ended up having a great discussion about NKT. And that's what got me started and kept me going on it. And without that, now I host a study group with Kento Kamiyama at our facility at Kettlebell Sport. And I look forward to it every time. It's just such a wonderful experience to dive in and really not let your learning quit, just to keep embracing the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you feel that actually being in person with somebody, doing the hands-on work, I mean, was that like the more, when you met with that friend of yours and actually practiced, was that like a bigger leap in your learning than going over videos and reading materials like that? Reading the theory about it helped you, but then when you actually met with somebody and it was like, I've got to make this commitment to see another person and practice this, that's what really pushed you along to learn it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the kind of person that I can reverberate anything off of a PowerPoint within 15 minutes. My God, I went to chiropractic school, took 33 credit hours per semester. I can, binge and purge information like anybody's business.
Yeah.
But that is not integration, and that is not really truly learning. And until I could really, show it to someone else and experience it for myself and feel it kinesthetically and put all that logic into proprioceptive work, that's where NKT really shines. So I feel like I'm still starting. I mean, I've only been doing this since 2012, and I feel like I'm still very much a newbie because I'm 5 years in, and some of the NKT members like Thomas Wells have been doing it for 15 years, David for 40, so I'm like, okay, I'm still, new too, and still learning in amazing ways. I know enough to be able to teach, and I still feel like I'm finding new connections and new things all the time. So yeah, you have to, I had to get together with people and talk things out, hash them out, practice, fail and learn. And I think it's a really important part to not only have mentorship, but also have a group to study with.
Yeah. Okay. So 2012, you said you were taking level 2 or level 1 back in 2012?
I took in January 2012, I took level 1.
Okay. That was
level 1.
And
then February 2013, I took level 2 in London.
Okay. So then from there, how did you get to being an instructor that you are now?
It was all in that year, Brandon. It was the most.
Year, 2013.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was the most amazing year. It was February. I got level 2 and got completely addicted to NKT, and then I was doing it on every single patient, every single visit, everybody that would let my hands on them. And that's what I should have been doing all along. And then I took his level 3 that summer in New York City, which back then was a very different type of level 3. But and so I was the first to get officially certified in level 3. The way it was then. And then I did my internship with David in, was it July? I think it was June. David would know better than I because his memory is impeccable. June or July of 2013, I did my internship with him. So I flew to San Francisco and stayed with him for, I think it was 4 or 5 days, and worked with patients with him side by side. And that was phenomenal. And then by that fall, by that September, I was the first instructor besides David to teach level 1. And then he eventually let me teach level 2. And then he just let me teach level 3 for the first time, solo, and fast. It would happen fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you were the first instructor of NKT.
Besides David. Yes.
David. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. He likes to share that too. Like a proud papa. He's a very wonderful man to trust me, with that. And I was relatively new, but I have a lot of teaching experience. And also I failed at NKT. And so I was a good person to also teach it because it didn't come easily to me. And so I had ways to help people when they struggled to be able to calm themselves and use good logic and also look at relationships and, you want a teacher that struggled a little bit with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think you could share any of those struggles? Maybe a little. Do you have any good failure stories that maybe you could share?
Oh, lots.
Yeah.
I have lots of great failure stories. Sure. I think one of the reasons I'm so inspired to teach, like I teach about 40 out of 52 weekends in the year between different seminars and anatomy and stuff and in KT. And the biggest reason I do that is to try to make up for all the people I think I failed in the past, so I figure I can try to offset that by helping people fail less in a way, or at least a way that's, I like a struggle, but have unnecessary struggles, like to minimize those and to focus on the necessary ones. I've had several patients where I felt like I was using a machine gun rather than a snipe.
Okay.
And I was like looking too much, like maybe focusing too locally and staying there too long. Like a knee problem was a knee problem. And instead of looking at how the foot affected the knee, or how the hip affected the knee, or what they had in common, or how the opposite shoulder affected the knee. And NKT really helped me branch away from that thinking of, David always tells you start local, then go global. And I had a lot of trouble with going global and seeing how everything interconnected. And I just sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to teach a study group at this time we had it every single week. We had a weekly study group. And I would do and I would do a full write-up. This went on for years, Brandon. We had, we had 3 years of weekly study groups. We just recently, I think Kento and I were like, okay, this is enough already. We've done every single thing that we can think of. Now we have one level 1 study group a month and one level 2 study group a month. But we used to have every single week level 1 and an additional level 2 every other week or something. And it was insane. And so Kento and I would do these massive write-ups afterwards. And so it would help. Like I would say, okay, I'm having trouble really helping people with, medial knee pain. Let me write everything I know about medial knee pain. Let me hash this out for myself. Everything I understand about the triplanar relationships with hip, knee, and foot. And then let's do a study group on that. And then that next week in practice, I would just start applying everything that we talked about and really honing in on it. And I became better as a practitioner because I was helping with these study groups. And I was like, wow, this really, really works. And before I knew it, I had less and less of the failures in my practice because I was applying the principles of NKT and basic biomechanics. And I got to tell you, it was a massive, massive change to my clinical practice, just being involved with the instruction of NKT. So for you newbies, like the instructors are still learning too. And every day we're learning. And there's not this magic moment where you're like, oh, I get NKT. It's a learning process. And you get better and better the more that you practice. You get more refined in your skill set. And I find myself getting better and better every day, every month, every year. And it builds up this great confidence. But you have to allow yourself that struggle period where you really commit to the material. Because that first year with NKT, I didn't commit. I was like, oh, I'll do a muscle test here and there. But I reverted back to doing all the things I was used to doing. And if not for Matt, I would not have, without my study buddy, I probably would have just let it go to the wayside. And then NKT wouldn't have been a part of my life, which would have been so sad.
Yeah, very sad for a lot of people.
Thank you. But yeah, for me, especially like from a selfish perspective, my gosh, the amount of people that I've helped with NKT principle sets, it's, amazing. It's really, really fun to be a part of.
So since you have so much teaching experience and you have taught so many people NKT, what are some just underlying things that you always see students get wrong or just make mistakes, or this is like where they fail most often? And can you give us like a few tips on that just to help people avoid those mistakes?
I can. I think that people, and it's not their fault because level 1 is really overwhelming because you're just learning a standard, like you're not even learning a standard operating system. You're learning how NKT theoretics work. And so you have to have that stage of difficulty where you're learning a new philosophy and a new protocol. And so I think people can deviate from the protocol too much, which is a bad thing to do. I think that you should definitely focus on that one slide in the PowerPoint that says NKT protocol and to not deviate from it. Another mistake I see people make is that they forget that there's a prioritization past the core. They say, okay, Powerhouse 5, they know that the core is a priority. But then when they have a shoulder problem, they start looking at the transverse plane too soon. Like they start saying, okay, I'm looking at this person has a rotator cuff tear, so I'm going to look for supraspinatus relationships to deltoid, or I'm going to look to, and I'm like, I don't ever do that with my patient because I know that there's a priority of joints that. And David puts it in the PowerPoint, but he's sneaky, and I don't know that all the students get it. And if you look closely, you'll see it. He does scapulothoracic joint, an AC joint, then glenohumeral joint. in the PowerPoint. And I think that he just doesn't say that blazing, and because he's so brilliant that to him it's commonplace. He would never, for a rotator cuff problem, start with the rotator cuff. He would start with the scapulothoracic joint, like something like anterior. And so, not that you can't do them in the same visit, of course you can, but if someone had like a reduced external rotation and I didn't first assess the way the scapula sits on the thorax, then asking that correction on their transverse plane glenohumeral joint is going to be really hard to hold. It's going to be hard to stabilize it because the scapula is not moving correctly. So I would tell level ones, please remember a scapulothoracic joint before a glenohumeral joint. And you can do it in the same visit. Just make sure that you prioritize scapulothoracic prior to glenohumeral.
Yeah, kind of like what you were saying earlier about how, David says look locally and then go globally. And before NKT, you were always just looking locally, and now you've kind of learned more about how to look globally. Yeah, and see how things affect other things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and when I started to think, like, I really started to pay attention to David, like in level 2, for the level 2 people, looking at the way that the PowerPoints are written, just like priority lists. Like, oh my God, he's so subtle. And I think if the instructor doesn't point that out, or they point it out, it's just an overwhelming weekend. So it's just like, it's so hard to think, okay, I'm going to do the core, then SI joint, then the hip, in the sagittal, then frontal, then transverse plane, and then the knee. It's written like that, but if you don't like hear that, then you start looking, I'm going to look for piriformis before I start looking for glute med. Like, you would never do that. So it's, I think his subtleties is sometimes missed. So I would say just don't forget to revisit your PowerPoint a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that PowerPoint is burned into my brain.
Good.
I read through it so many times. Yeah.
Good.
Well, that brings me to another question. What did your practice look like, if you can paint a little bit of a picture here for us, before you did NKT, and then now after you've done NKT? What are like some big changes? Like you said a second ago, the going locally and then globally and looking at things differently. What are more of those kinds of things that just were total changes looking back through your practice now that you know NKT?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm a movement specialist, right? So I'm a chiropractic rehab specialist, which basically means I don't just adjust. I spend 45 minutes with repeat patients and an hour and 15 with new patients. And so basically, I do a global assessment before, and I did that beforehand. But I didn't have a really nice standard operating system. I was kind of all over the place. Like, I would do like a regional exam because that's how I was trained at chiropractic school. And then I would do a gait assessment, which is also how I was trained. But I didn't have a really nice operating system. And then right after I took level 1 NKT, right after I took level 2 NKT, I took the selective functional movement assessment by Greg Cook. And then a few weeks later, I took the CKFMS, so the advanced FMS screening. And then I took level 3 NKT, all of this within 3 months.
Wow.
And so my practice completely got overhauled in 2013.
Okay.
Now it's a top tier SFMA, a gait assessment, NKT perturbation, really using the subsystems to prioritize a breathing assessment for intrinsic core, and then, trying to, collaborate with all of those findings and say, okay, what is my priority list? Because the problem with NKT, the thing that people get overwhelmed with NKT is that there's a gazillion different relationships. Which one do you focus on?
Yeah.
And that's someone who does not have a priority list. And so I would say you need to, I really think level 2 meant everything to me because it gave me an operating system of intrinsic core and then extrinsic assessment through the subsystems. I needed that. Okay. For me personally, I needed a way to prioritize, like a pilot, a standard operating system, a checklist. And that's supported in peer-reviewed literature to make you more effective, to have an operating system. So you can of course deviate from that after you've achieved your optimization, so it's really helpful when there's so many relationships you don't know what to focus on, that you have a priority list in biomechanics. Look, I'm going to look at intrinsic core first because that's my internal stability system. And then I'm going to look at deep longitudinal system because that's how I maintain sagittal plane bipedalism and gait. And then I'm going to look at coronal plane because that's the next plane, the Y plane. And then I'll look at Z, anterior and posterior oblique slings. And I the first hour of David's level 2, I was like, oh my God, how did I wait so long to prioritize?
Yeah.
So that's how my practice changed. I finally had a priority list that matched, I just needed lots of reasons to support, for me as a clinician, to be able to support my SOAPs that I was doing the right thing, but to not machine gun my muscle testing, because that machine gunning muscle testing exhausts the patient and gives you false
Oh
positives.
yeah.
And so, and you know this as an NKT practitioner. So I'm like, what can I do to limit the amount of muscle testing, total muscle testing I'm doing, and really zone in on the priority? So for me, it was just using basic movement assessment, using gait assessment, and also using breathing testing and perturbation with an analysis in relationship to those. And
Okay.
I'm very streamlined at this point. My
Yeah.
patients know exactly what's coming. Like they're always going to get their gait assessed. They're always going to, see me do things that are NKT related. And they know that. The first visit, they're like shocked and they're like, oh, what is this? And they're very excited to learn about themselves.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. Yeah, so you have like certain kind of standard assessment things you do. So you kind of do, other assessments before you do your NKT assessments. That kind of helps.
That's how I do it.
Lead into, the sniper focus you're talking about with your NKT.